The European Union established its presence in Nigeria over 40 years ago. Over that time, it has been a partner to Nigeria as it underwent some of the most defining moments in its history. The EU has been involved in the economical, social, political aspects of Nigeria's evolution. Many will not forget in a hurry its role in ensuring a free, fair and transparent electoral process in the 2015 general elections. My guest today is Michel Arrion. He is the ambassador and head of the EU delegation to Nigeria and ECOWAS. I am Segun Ojumu, and this is Hindsight. Segun Ojumu. On this program, we'll be bringing you news, views, and exclusive interviews with
security that cut across humanitarian aid to.
It becomes easier to do business in Nigeria. Now,
Nigeria.
The EU over the last 4 decades has proven to be a major player in the international development community of Nigeria. It has a very active presence in vital sectors such as health, nutrition, water, and sanitation. It has also led initiatives such as improving access to sustainable electricity, fight against corruption, drugs, and organized crime. It doesn't end there. It has lent its support to the reform of the justice system and measures to improve the democratic process. Joining me now to discuss this legacy of the EU in Nigeria is Mr. Michel Arrion. He is the EU ambassador and head of the delegation to Nigeria and ECOWAS. Michel Arrion, thank you very much.
Thank you
For coming on the program. Now, let me begin by asking you what you think the biggest legacy or greatest legacy of the EU in Nigeria in the last 40 years is.
Well, 40 years means that we started in 76. At that time, you know, the EU of 76 was very different from the EU of 2016 or 17 this year. In 76, we were mainly a kind of development agency, right? But since then, we have expanded our range of responsibilities within the EU, and that has translated into different actions outside the EU. So you recalled our action in health, nutrition, water, etc.
Yeah,
but progressively we added to those actions, I would say, a more robust presence in trade relations and trade and investments, I would say.
Okay.
But also all the political area. You also recalled our action during the elections. Well, so if I have to choose one thing, I would say accompanying Nigeria since '99, since the return to the civilian regime, was probably the biggest achievement. And since '99, we have repeatedly accompanied the elections and observed the elections, and we are seeing an improvement in the way the results are more and more credible. No, it's the word we are using. It's not free, fair, and transparent. It's credible. Yes, okay. yes. So we believe that the democracy is more and more credible in Nigeria, which is quite an achievement, I would say.
All right. Nigeria has undergone, some upheavals in its political history. More than ever now, it is, all of this has been threatened by core agitations, secessionist tendencies, and in the east, and different calls in the north. What are you doing about this? We thought that was going to happen during the election. We thought everybody thought that it was going to break apart during the elections, but that didn't happen. But now we're having this kind of challenges.
Well, you're right. Our biggest fear was a violent process, and it did not happen. I mean, too many deaths, but not as many as some would have expected. So, and secondly, no violent intervention from Boko Haram during the elections. No violent actions from people from the Delta or from other secessionist groups. So, I would say, all in all, Nigeria has been preserved from those violent actions within the democratic process of the elections. What we are seeing today, you're right to recall us that indeed there are some voices of people, you call it agitation or militancy. Well, I'm not too concerned about those movements, although they probably illustrate the fact that I mean, the Nigeria remains a work in progress, right?
Okay.
So the federal character of Nigeria is such that people sometimes are believing more in their states than in their united country. So I think Nigeria, not only the federal government, but for instance the Forum of Governors should work together just to really implement what people would call, unity in diversity. Okay for diversity, but remain united. So, and for that you need a system where the diversity is recognized, but also solidarity is in place. So you have rich areas in the country and poorer areas. People have to contribute from the rich to the poor if everybody is making some effort to work together. So you have to put in place institutional system where there is some kind of redistribution, where there is some kind of equitable treatment of all citizens. I'm not saying equal, I'm saying equitable. We know the statistics. For sure, I mean, poverty is not evenly distributed in the country. No, there are reasons for that, and on those issues you have to work. But that doesn't mean that I mean the poorest states do not have to make more efforts than others. It's just that the federal character is such that it has to put in place a system where there is a good balance between duties, obligations, and interest and benefits for everyone.
It's interesting you talked about the equitable distribution of the wealth, but at the heart of that issue is the problem of corruption.
Yeah.
Okay, what are your thoughts on this, and tell us what you as an institution has been doing to ensure that this becomes a thing of the past.
Yeah, well, corruption, like many other threats on the country, is an issue primarily for Nigerians, right? I really believe that only Nigerians can solve their own problems. So what we can do is to support, to assist, to help, to advise, but the core efforts and the core decisions have to be made by Nigerians. So what we are doing, for instance, is supporting the FCC, the EFCC, and other agencies fighting corruptions. We are trying to reinforce their capacities, also other agencies involved in the fight against corruption. The whole treatment of corruption is not only investigation, but it's also trial. So working on the judiciary system. One has also to bear in mind that corruption is not only something that happens in the public sector. I mean, as you know, private sector is unfortunately very much suffers from corruption. So it's really entrenched in the various economic forces, not only the political but also the economic forces of the country. So it's not only supporting federal agencies or the authorities, but also people who want to address the root causes of corruption. People, we used to work in the past with the bar, the Nigerian Bar Association. You have to work with lawyers. You have to work with business people. We worked with the Competitiveness Council. We could work, with the new body aiming to improve the business environment, because if you want to attract foreign investment or domestic, if you want to keep domestic investment in the country, you have to listen to the business people and you have to work with them. So it's I would say a multifaceted issue that needs a multi-pronged response, for sure.
Okay, so, we're going to go on a short break right now, but before we go on that break, can you briefly give us your assessment? This administration came to power, promising to fight corruption. In your own, as an institution, is that fight or that war succeeding? Do you think it is succeeding?
Well, I would say they have invested a lot. There have been many actions. I mean, there is not a single day without news about people who've been arrested or investigation who are making progress or or any kind of news about the fight against corruption. The problem is the results so far. It's not only to catch the corrupt people, it's also to get back their assets and the money they may have embezzled, etc. So because it's not only the criminal aspect of the corruption that has to be fought, it's also the economic and the economic impact and the consequences on the budget and on the quality. I mean, if a road is just destroyed after 2 or 3 years just because corrupt people have managed to get the contract and then they are not delivering what they are supposed to deliver because the price they have to pay kickbacks and other occult commissions, etc. Well, you have a problem, you have an economic problem. It's not only the criminal aspect of the things.
Okay, very well. We're going to get your thoughts more on that, but we're going to take a short break now, and then Hindsight returns with Michel Arrion. Stay with us. On this program, we'll be bringing you news, views, and exclusive interviews with
security that cut across humanitarian aid.
It becomes easier to do business in Nigeria. Now,
Nigeria.
All right, welcome back. I'm still with Michel Arrion. He's the head of the EU delegation, EU ambassador to Nigeria, and the head of the European Union delegation to Nigeria and ECOWAS. Okay, before we went on that break, we were talking about corruption and wealth being stolen, the economic dimension to it all. One criticism that the EU has, suffered in the past is, its failure to ensure that some of this stolen wealth, now the ones that go outside these shores, are returned to Nigeria. Now, what is your take on that? Do you think those criticisms have been fair?
Well, not really, because they're the EU and they are the EU member states. So
Exactly.
the EU as a bloc has no real responsibility in returning the stolen assets. What we can do is to facilitate some kind of police cooperation or judiciary cooperation, but basically our member states on a bilateral basis are working on the return of stolen assets. I was reading last weekend a report of Transparency International on corruption. Well, they mentioned where are the stolen assets? In Dubai, in America,
London.
well, in London indeed, in Switzerland, it's much more, it's much, or Liechtenstein, or which is not the EU, even if it's a European continent.
Yeah.
Or other tax havens, there is much more than stolen assets. There are also illegal financial flows. Tax evasion, ways and means to avoid tax in an illegal manner, because there are also legal manners. So the distinction is not always easy to make. What we can do as an EU bloc, is to try to harmonize, for instance, the rules related to the due diligences of the banks, because the banking sector is very often closely involved in those transactions. They are not, luggage full of cash. No, it's bank
Wire
transfers. So I think we can, at the EU level, work more with the financial institutions, something that we are doing already. We are working with the OECD, we are working with the IMF. So it's a matter of international cooperation. But one should not emphasize too much the role of international institutions like the EU or others. I mean, it's basically a Nigerian problem. And involving Nigerians. Of course, there are external aspects of it. I'm not denying that. But the core problem is in Nigeria, Nigeria. It starts here. So if you want to address the root causes, just put the house in order before accusing the neighbors, I would say. Yeah.
Okay, very well, fair enough. Let's talk about an area which you've been deeply involved in since the Boko Haram crisis started. Now and then, of course, the fallout, the situation with the IDPs in the northeast, in Abuja and other parts of the country. I understand that the EU has is spent between 100 and 200 million euros.
That's the last funding, yes.
That's a lot. Okay. Now, only last week, another 143,
yes,
was pledged. Now, accountability is key. We've heard reports of diversions, for example. And what mechanisms are you putting in place to ensure that these funds get to the people that need them so desperately?
Yes, well, we are indeed responding to the crisis in the Northeast, both at the humanitarian level and at the recovery, rehabilitation and reconstruction level. Those are two different issues. You know, humanitarian assistance is there to save lives. People are literally dying. You know, there is a famine, food insecurity, malnutrition, etc. So we are bringing food, we are bringing other non-food items to the populations, mainly IDPs in camps or in informal settlements. And we have a long tradition of humanitarian assistance, and we are implementing that through the UN agencies and international NGOs. So actually we are very much counting on the responsibility and accountability of our implementing partners to make sure that the goods are delivered to the beneficiaries and those who are in need. Reconstruction, rehabilitation, recovery is different, because there we are working with the Nigerian authorities. It's much more, I would say it's more a structural response. And then we are working mainly with, as much as we can, with the local authorities. So for instance, we are focusing on Borno. We are working with the governor of Borno. We are working with the RRR commissioner, you know, resettlement, rehabilitation, reconstruction. And we are there signing direct contracts with contractors. So we have to put in place systems of monitoring and evaluation together with the local authorities. So that is what we are doing. So again, we have this long tradition of working together with Nigerian authorities and also with private sector, because we will be financing constructions, we will be financing supplies, and but also technical assistance. You know, will be implemented in the longer term. And well, we are of course we are very much aware of the necessity to monitor the way the funds are spent, but we are working with the local authorities to do so.
Okay, okay, very well. Let's quickly go to the issue of migration. A lot of Nigerians sadly have made that very perilous journey to in search of the better life on the streets of Europe. Now, let me read to you this report by the Human Rights Watch for 2016. It criticized the EU. It says EU governments and institutions responded in 2016 in ways that often undercut or set aside core values and rights protections rather than working consistently together to defend them. It goes ahead to say the EU as a whole failed to show leadership and solidarity in the face of the largest global displacement since World War II. EU policies focus primarily on preventing arrivals and outsourcing responsibility for asylum seekers and refugees to other nations or other regions. How do you react to that?
Well, I know very well, and we know very well this report from Human Rights Watch. But as you mentioned in the last sentence, it's about asylum seekers and refugees. So it's not at all what we are dealing with here in Nigeria. You know, there is a clear distinction between those economic migrants from sub-Saharan Africa. Many of them are from Nigeria, but they are very different from, and we are talking about a few dozens of thousands of people. We are talking about 50,000 Nigerians, maybe 100,000, but it has nothing to compare with the million of refugees, the million of asylum seekers fleeing Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and those are protected by the refugee conventions, right? So I would say the challenges are totally different. We are talking about million of people who are arriving by land and who are just crossing Syria and then Turkey, etc. So we have made that deal with Turkey, and we believe that we have found an acceptable solution, we are also helping Lebanon, Jordan, to take care of those refugees.
You're giving Turkey some money for this.
We are giving a lot of money to Turkey just to provide humanitarian assistance and protection to asylum seekers, right?
Instead of to prevent them from coming to Europe.
From coming to Europe, because we hope that if and when we can address the root causes of the war in Syria, they will return to Syria. Those poor Syrians or those poor Afghan people, I mean, they want to stay in their country. And we hope that when peace will be back, they will be able to return to Afghanistan, to Iraq, or to Syria. Why not? In the meantime, they should not travel too far away, and they should remain in the neighborhood, right? Whereas, as far as the economic migrants of sub-Saharan Africa are concerned, they have no reason to leave their country, because they do not fear, I mean, there are no risk for their lives, right? So it's quite different, and they do not fall under the conditions of those international agreements on refugees. That doesn't mean that we should not treat them decently, and that doesn't mean that we should put them in prison. That for sure. Again, we are talking about, are we talking about EU or are we talking about some EU countries? Many of the countries that are on the front line of those people crossing the Mediterranean Sea, that is Italy, Greece, France, Spain to a lesser extent, you know, they are doing a lot to save the lives of those people. They are saving lives. They are spending.
We have videos of that.
You have videos of that. We are. They are spending millions with their naval forces, and they are rescuing those poor people, and they are trying to save their lives and then to provide them with minimum assistance. But it's a totally different political framework, I would say. And again, we have to work together with the countries of origin of those economic migrants to return them to their country of origin in a decent manner and with the assistance of the country of origin. Also, we have to fight the criminal networks of smugglers and traffickers, because many of those poor economic migrants, they believe that Europe is a paradise, green pasture, and where do they end? Well, they end sometimes, some girls in the streets, victims of prostitution networks. Others will have to to become drug dealers or criminals, or I mean, and that's something I'm sure they would never believe they would be almost forced to do. So we have to work much more in terms of communication, awareness raising, again, address the root causes. Who wants to live? Nigerians are proud, yes? Yes. I have met so many Nigerians. The first thing they tell me, I am a proud Nigerian. If you are a proud Nigerian, stay here, work for your country. You can go to Europe, but then return and just invest in your country.
Okay, we're going to be ending this program right here. But before we go, you leave Nigeria in the summer.
Yes.
Now, what would be your biggest takeaway from Nigeria? 30 seconds.
Oh, well, 30 seconds, it's not very fair. I need more. But I would say I very much like my stay here in Nigeria because of the Nigerians, right? I have met so many dynamic, friendly, extremely well-educated Nigerians who want to fix the problems in Nigeria. And it's really, and many of them extremely well-educated, and I said, having traveled abroad with family in America, in Europe, or sometimes having studied abroad, came back here, investing in their country, developing a business, investing in IT,
different sectors,
digital, very modern way of thinking. So there are so many brilliant Nigerians with really modern thinkers. And on the other hand, you have so many poor people, not educated, many living with less than $2 per day. I mean, so what is really striking is this disparity, this difference between
the rich and the poor.
the rich and the poor, indeed. And but of course, in my position, I've met more poor than more rich than poor people in Nigeria. But what is nice is also, of course, I worked in other countries in West Africa, and in that respect, Nigerians are not very different from other West Africans. Very warm, very friendly.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. It's been a pleasure having you on the program.
Thank you very much indeed.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for as we come to the end of this edition of Hindsight. It's been a pleasure having Michel Arrion on the show. Now let's keep the conversation going online. We are on Twitter. Tweet us and we'll tweet you right back at HindsightSTV, or you can email us on hindsightsilverbird@gmail.com. From me, Shegun Jumu, and the rest of the crew, goodbye for now.